Thank you. I want to recognize that it is a difficult time for many of us to make the time and take the time to be together in this space and to imagine the future of the Academy at a time when so much is happening and so many difficult things are happening on our campuses. And I would say that now more than ever, it's important to focus on and hold dear to the values that give our lives and work meaning. The breath, I hope that you felt, brings us back to ourselves and into a space of community in which we might think more creatively about the painful and complex issues we're currently facing. Also in that book, Holding Change, that Adrienne Marie Brown wrote, she invited many wise collaborators, and one of them is a woman named Sage Crump, and she writes, "I believe our ability to recognize, accept, and move with complexity is integral to how we dismantle the current state and build new ways of being with each other. The ability to engage complexity is directly tied to our ability to imagine." End quote. So the next 2 days, the next sessions we'll have today and tomorrow will open spaces for us to grapple with complexity and imagine new ways of being together. And at the heart of the imaginative and creative work the HuMetrics Initiative has undertaken has been an intentional commitment to identify and enact our core values in our efforts to transform higher education. So as I was thinking about what I might say at the beginning, I did think about a couple of values I'd like to activate in this space at the start, one of which is community. It is wonderful to be in, even if it is virtual, community with one another. It's certainly a community, and one that we in the HuMetrics team value deeply and care very deeply about. So part of the purpose of this convocation is to continue to nurture that community and deepen our relationships with one another. The second one I would activate, and is very appropriate because I see Kathleen Fitzpatrick is in the audience, is generosity, the ability really to give each other the benefit of the doubt and to be generous with each other is such an important value, and one that I've seen work wonders with relationships as we try to create cultures of meaning and belonging and change. And then the third value, my colleagues will not be surprised to hear me activate, is ethical imagination, which I have insisted and continued to emphasize is a movement beyond empathy. It involves empathy, but it also involves our ability to listen to each other, to imagine a more just and beautiful future based on the empathy and the connections we feel with one another. So may community, generosity, and ethical imagination animate our work over the next few days and moving forward. The values enacted approach that we've taken with HuMetrics is already having a transformative impact on higher education. It's helped shape the Breaking the Mold initiative, which is drawing a wider diversity of faculty into leadership by helping them imagine how they can enact their core values in their leadership practice. We've seen how strategic planning at the University of Maryland, both at the university level, and I think as Stephanie will probably talk a little bit about at the college level, has been animated and shaped by the values enacted approach. And we've done some really meaningful work with Diane Harris and the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Washington to identify principles that will shape the decisions that they make in that college. To say nothing of a very wide diversity of other workshops we've done across the higher education community colleges and liberal arts colleges and Ivy League colleges. It's been a really amazing, I don't know now, 7, 8 years is I think what we're talking about. So, and as many of you know, one of the most meaningful initiatives that's been animated by HuMetrics for me personally as a leader at Michigan State University has been the creation of the Charting Pathways of Intellectual Leadership framework and initiative that Sonja, I know, will talk more about in a minute. As many of you know, we lost a dear friend and colleague, Bill Hart Davidson, suddenly on March 23rd. And I can still remember, I know Sonja does too, the workshops that we did with Bill, where we were brainstorming about, what if we just thought of a new model for tenure and promotion, just if we shifted the values from teaching, research, and service to sharing knowledge, expanding opportunity and mentorship and stewardship, what would happen? And, Bill was such a creative and beautiful person, and he really is at the heart of this work, both in the HuMetrics and in the Charting Pathways of Intellectual Leadership. And I can still remember going into his office where that chart was, on his whiteboard for many, many months as we were workshopping it. So he is missed and he is here, and we are grateful for the time we had with him, and are grateful to continue the work that he would have been so much of a champion in this next few days. So with that, I am going to turn it over to my dear colleague, Sonja Fritzsche. As many of you know, I will be departing for University of Oregon in a few weeks to become their provost. And I can't tell you, Sonja, how grateful I have been for our friendship, our partnership, our work together over the last 9 years here at Michigan State University. So with that, I will turn it over to you.
Well, right back at you, Chris. So welcome. Our session today is entitled Living Our Values, Leading Efforts for Values-Enacted Institutional Transformation in the Humanities. I'm Sonja Fritzsche. I'm Associate Dean of Undergraduate Studies and Administration and a Professor of German Studies in the College of Arts and Letters at Michigan State. But before we begin in this virtual space, I wish to acknowledge the lands upon which the participants and the servers that power our virtual meeting room sit, and to ask you to consider whose land you are on. Michigan State University, a critical land grant institution, occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples. And by offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will also work to hold Michigan State University more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous peoples. I would like to thank our organizers from the HuMetrics Humane Metrics Initiative and also the multiple HuMetrics community fellows who are participating today. The title of this series of roundtables asks us to envision a transformational future in higher education. And today we will discuss how this phrase is understood and about ways the panelists are endeavoring to apply them at their own institutions, after which we will invite active audience participation. So now I will introduce the participants briefly. We have Stephanie Shonekan, Dean of the College of Arts and Humanities at the University of Maryland. Trevor Parry-Giles, Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs and Research at the College of Arts and Humanities at the University of Maryland. Kiril Tomoff, Associate Dean of Arts and Humanities in the College of the Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences at the University of California, Riverside, and myself as well. Before we begin, in order to frame the discussion, I've been asked to say a little bit about the Charting Pathways of Intellectual Leadership initiative that affectionately we call CPIL, that we've been working on in the college that Chris was just talking about. So too often, our scholarship is reduced to the resultant thing or object of that scholarship, rather than focusing on the enjoyable interactions with the people involved and the meaning of the scholarly processes along the way. The what is emphasized rather than the who with, how, and why of the everyday present. But why should we reduce all of the excitement and motivation, this love that we have for our subjects, the impactful interactions with others, the meaningful thoughts and exchanges to a single output, like the article or the book or the exhibition or the film? We all know of the colleagues who are doing high impact work that they find most meaningful both on and off campus. They are doing advocacy work or otherwise engaging with communities to address inequities. They are working to change policies or regulations. They are sharing knowledge with a broader public. They are creating mentoring and other support networks for underrepresented groups in academia and grade schools. I had a colleague doing that the other day, went to a middle school. At the same time, these colleagues face resistance from often more senior colleagues and administrators, sometimes like myself, who are unable or unwilling to recognize the value of this alternate intellectual labor that these colleagues find most meaningful, even when this work is recognized by their own peers. And so in my college at Michigan State, over the past 6 years that I've been in the position, we have been reviewing our tenure system and non-tenure system promotion policies and practices and working together on the charting pathways of intellectual leadership model. We includes Chris Long, our late colleague, Bill Hart Davidson, to who we dedicate this work. Sorry. Myself, as well as other chairs, directors, faculty, and staff in the college. Excuse me. Intellectual leadership refers to the idea that colleagues can have a broader and meaningful impact throughout the course of their career that aligns with their own personal and professional values. Importantly, this model applies to faculty and staff and students. Tenure stream faculty were frustrated that the work that was most important to them was not being recognized in annual review or promotion and tenure, or it was being artificially separated between research and service. Non-tenure system faculty felt that their appointment type didn't fully align with the traditional categories of teaching, research, and service. And they've always been known as non-something, right? Non-research faculty. What kind of identity is that? So we began to ask faculty, what if we shifted the lens a bit? We started to ask colleagues how they shared knowledge, expanded opportunities, and practiced mentorship and stewardship. Important too were the values that made up the foundation of the faculty members' work, through which they held themselves accountable. These values are interchangeable depending upon unit or person. So it is in this spirit that I now ask the roundtable participants to introduce themselves in the way they want to be seen. Rather than have me recite all of the product outputs in a traditional introduction, we have decided to transform introductions and ask the following question then of ourselves. So to you all, first, remind us of who you are, and then describe the work that has been the most central and rewarding to you that wasn't necessarily counted by the promotion and tenure processes that existed when you came up for tenure and promotion or for a full professor. So Stephanie, would you maybe like to go first?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Sonja, I felt that just now. It's very lovely to remember a colleague and to dedicate the work that we do to our colleagues that have contributed so much. So thank you. So my name is Stephanie Shonekan, Dean of the College of Arts and Humanities at the University of Maryland. This is just my second year, but I do love this question that Sonja poses because it's a question that nudges us to think about what joys we've had in our careers that were not counted, and whether we can change the way we do things in the academy to allow scholars who are coming after us to include those kinds of joyful and meaningful and impactful work in the promotion and tenure process. So I would say the one that I continue to enjoy is creating podcasts. I am an ethnomusicologist, which means I study music and culture, and all the work that I have produced that got me to the full professor rank was the traditional work. It was the books, the book about country music and soul music, the book about an African-American singer, opera singer, and so on. which I enjoyed doing all of those. But what really brought me so much joy early in my career was, first of all, a short film I made based on the life of Fela Anikulapo Kuti's mother. And that film was so much work, but so joyful to make with my students and with colleagues. And the work really shed light, another angle of light on Fela Anikulapo Kuti, who we've all, well, many of us have heard of, listened to his music and read books about. Then the second is these podcasts that I began at the University of Missouri. Never put them on my CV because, you know, it's a podcast. And that podcast is continuing on. And what is wonderful right now is that at the University of Maryland, we have wonderful faculty that teach about podcasts. I got to visit one of these classes and talk about my podcast, which is on an NPR, through an NPR station. So I'm glad to see young colleagues who are on the tenure track whose work is focused on media and podcast analysis and research and production. And so that's what I would say is something that I missed putting on my portfolio.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I just really love to hear these answers. Trevor, would you mind going next, and then Kiril?
Sure. As Sonja said, I'm Trevor Parry-Giles. I'm the Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs and Research at Maryland. And before that, I was in another life as the professor in our communication department, where I believe Dean Shonekan's experience with the podcasting occurred. So that's good to know. Probably, it's hard to think about because it was a fairly long time ago. But the thing that I was most engaged in as an associate professor that I didn't feel was adequately accounted for and or relevant to my promotion to professor was a fair amount of sort of media work. And I guess I would call that kind of, you know, going on talk shows, being consulted by reporters, being quoted in news stories, being in documentary films as a kind of one of those expert types. And, you know, it's kind of silly, but I enjoyed doing it. I felt like it potentially had a bigger reach than the obscure journal article that nobody ever read. And, you know, I liked it, but I wasn't convinced that my colleagues or the college/university recognized it as much as maybe I would think could be possible in a APT process that is committed to rewarding and appreciating public engagement, public outreach, that kind of thing. I'm not complaining, but it is one of those areas where I think we've made inroads and we're moving in the right direction. But so many years ago, I felt that it was a little underappreciated, let's say. So.
Thank you, Trevor, and Kiril.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kiril Tomoff. I'm Associate Dean for Arts and Humanities, and at the moment, halfway through a short term as acting dean for the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences, and a professor in the History Department. And in a general sense, I guess I would say the one thing that has been central to my career as an academic, holistically considered, is that hasn't always been recognized formally in advancement is service. One of the most satisfying experiences of my career is still a role that I held as an assistant professor. And that was when I was the director of the University of California's system-wide study center in Moscow. The year before I did this work, it was held by an advanced professor at UCLA. After I did it, it was taken over by a distinguished professor at Berkeley. And in the middle, there was this assistant professor from the University of California, Riverside, who did it. It was terrific experience for me, and incredibly rewarding to facilitate the life-changing experience that the student participants on that program had, and also to successfully navigate two institutional cultures, the University of California and our new partner institution in Moscow, during the first year of a new institutional affiliation. So it was the actual work was very rewarding. It also set me on an early trajectory in which my colleagues at UCR think of me as someone who's good at service and administration. But that activity and the significant amount of sort of informal appreciation that I've enjoyed until very recently didn't ever count in my advancement, especially post tenure. But I should also say that my main motivation for getting involved in the HuMetrics project initially, and ultimately in administration, was not my own case, but really observing some incredibly important things to which some of my colleagues devote enormous amounts of energy and expertise, and which I think have a really huge level of impact, but for which they received very little credit in merits and promotions. And for that, I can say exactly the sorts of things that Stephanie and Trevor just articulated are the sorts of things that I see my colleagues who are more involved in that kind of work than I am, and that I so much appreciate, not getting the credit that I think that I have long thought that they deserved. And so that was one of my motivations for getting involved in HuMetrics, is to think about ways that we might be able to influence the merit and promotion system to more adequately reward these kinds of activities that are so essentially linked to our values.
Thank you very much. I was going to answer this question for myself, but I'm just watching time, and I want to make sure we're already almost at 9. Sorry, I'm not 9:30. You're in a different time zone than I am, but so I want to go on to the next question. So considering the integral relationship between humanistic inquiry, academic work, and our institutional structures, what do we mean by a values-enacted approach to institutional transformation in the humanities? Who wants to go for that one first? Trevor.
I've always, I guess, taken my lead on this question from former Dean Thornton Dill, who, rightly drew our attention to the fact that so much of the institutional work that we do, particularly, and I'm with Kiril on this, around promotion and tenure and what faculty are recognized for and the like, is driven by what we can measure. I was recently on a committee that was choosing a very prestigious university-wide research award. And 3 of the nominees for the award were from the humanities and arts and humanities, and 1 was from the sciencey side of campus. I'll leave it unnamed. And I knew going in that this was going to be a problem or a concern, but what I discovered was that the science folks on the committee are extremely adept at marshaling the measurable evidence to make their arguments for why somebody's research is to be valued or to be appreciated. And as Bonnie has often said, we spend a lot of time valuing what we can measure, but we don't spend enough time thinking about measuring what it is we actually value. And so that's always kind of how I framed this in my own mind, that it requires that we think long and hard and communally about what we believe are our values, but that we also recognize that the metrization of quality, of excellence, of teaching, all of those things are potentially problematic for those of us in the arts and humanities, but more problematic generally for really capturing the, as somebody I think said, the joy, maybe it was Stephanie, the joy of what it is we do, and why we get joy from that. So that's always, I guess, how I framed it. I've thought of it as, and I don't like the necessary polarization or polarity of metrics versus values. I don't think that's necessarily healthy, but I do think a sort of realignment of the ways in which we prioritize that which we can measure versus that which we value is fundamental to this kind of work. And it's one of the reasons why I was drawn to this whole endeavor, I guess.
Stephanie?
Yes, I'll just say very quickly, I agree with everything Trevor said in response to the question. I think I'll just add that the question really is at the heart of where we are as humanities scholars and humanities colleges and schools and departments. We are constantly on the defensive, talking about how we're important, why we're relevant. And lately we've been, and not just us here at Maryland, but I think a number of us are saying, yes, we are. We know we are. We just need to show that value. And so when we think about how our colleagues over in the sciences are valued, right? They're valued for spending years in a lab working on one thing that has to do with a frog or a tadpole or something, right? A little plant. And that's enough, it's enough that they spend their time working on all of that. They publish articles, about 10 of them on one article. That's great. That goes on their in their portfolio or in their file. For us, we spend a ton of time in the community. We spend a lot of time, what Kiril said about what he did as an assistant professor, working with a bunch of faculty to help think about the value of what we offer in the humanities. I imagine it was more than the humanities, Kiril, but that's where our time is spent. The amount of time Trevor spends, he was at a White House panel last semester. Can he use that? I mean, it used his expertise. He got to engage with other people in other fields who think about the presidency. The work that I do, for example, in the podcast or on this project that I do called Race and the American Story, where we just talk about the history of race. Not a book, I mean, it's a book now, but for years it wasn't a book, but it was a lot of work. Can we be evaluated on, that's our tadpole, that's our frog, is doing all the things that may result in a book or a media project or an interview on CNN or whatever, right? Our options should not be just one thing. It should be all the things that situate us as the center of the academy.
I think I can just really quickly build on that to say that in the process of attempting to either lead or participate in values enacted in institutional transformation, it crosses all of those different kinds of areas of our activity. So it could be anything from as simple as explicitly centering a declared institutional value in a conversation about the life of the institution, even if that conversation doesn't have anything to do with transformation, even if it's just a sort of centering a kind of common ground to before, especially I found it especially useful to do that when I'm about to have a difficult conversation with someone, and often it becomes less difficult when we agree that what we're both doing is centering an institutional value. But it also goes beyond that to remaking decision-making processes, like our merits and promotion, or devising tools to align the outcomes of those processes with stated values. And that's something I can talk about in a little bit.
I'd like to add to this too. I think when I came on as in the associate dean positions, I had been department chair at Michigan State and then in another institution before that. And, you know, making decisions and working with folks. And I came to those positions with a preparation. My dad taught business ethics, right? He was a business faculty member, but teaching ethics, and had come up with a theory why it would help the bottom line to be ethical in your decisions. So, you know, I was sort of bringing that background too. And so coming into this space then with Chris and also Bill, as at the beginning of the HuMetrics grant, and sort of watching him come from your workshops with the cards and you know, and really then taking values that we had come up with and thinking about when we are making decisions, okay, how do we make this decision? If we do it, who do we need to consult with? Then how are we going to be, what does openness mean, right? What does trust mean? Okay, well, trust means that we need to talk with these people and have open and honest conversations about what's going on. So who are those people? Okay, we figure out who the people are, we talk with them, and then do we write a policy. Okay, we can't just post it, then we have to go back and be open and have conversations about that, right? So it's this. And it was always then the focus on the process. And that's what I really came to appreciate, was not the end goal, but that process was just as important, and enacting and letting the values guide you in that process to create the relationship with people. And that's what I've found so useful, is how do you act as an administrator and you know, educate through the process and have the values then structure your interactions with each other. And those have become the most important to me. In the end, the policy is important, but it's those values. And if I don't uphold those values in my process, then I don't, you know, then things are lost and I have to rebuild them. So that's what I've found so useful in all of this. Okay, so second question. Values are often formulated and stated openly in the abstract. So I've sort of said that to come on, to bridge into this. It is often less clear how to actually live these values as expressed by the HuMetrics initiative. We'll move now to a discussion of how we have applied a values enacted approach at our own institutions. So who would like to talk about that?
I can start. So I think in the 2 years that this is, again, just the end of my second year, but Trevor and I have worked really hard to, especially coming out from HuMetrics, which is something I was introduced to when I arrived here. I'd heard about it, read a little bit about it, and then when I arrived here, I think we did a workshop in the first year, on the first semester that I was here. So I understood more. I know those cards, know and love those cards. They're really, really useful. And so what Trevor and I have done is that we have really tried to encourage our academic promotion and tenure committee, that's APT, to think more broadly about every file that comes our way. Trevor is the one that shepherds the committee. I kind of sit on the side as an objective bystander, but I watch what is going on. But from time to time, we encourage the committee to really think in fresh ways about what they're reading in a file. I think because the Academy is so entrenched in the ways that it's always been done, this, as we all know, is going to take a lot of time and consistency to try and turn the boat around. And so we've really encouraged freshness. And I think Trevor can speak to this. As a result, I think this last, when we can't say names, of course, or anything, but we saw some results in this last round of promotion and tenure where the committee actually said, okay, a little bit different, but this is important work. This is work that will be useful to a number of people that come and see the work afterwards. Not a book on the bookshelf, but it's certainly as impactful, if not more so. So that's how we're doing it. And with time, and we were ready, we were poised. If there was an issue with a couple of those files as they went from the college to the campus, Trevor and I were ready to go and educate them on HuMetrics, you know, and explain why that work also has value.
Trevor or Kiril?
I don't really have much to add. I do think that Stephanie encapsulated it pretty well. Outside of the APT process, I think you know, there's a mutual admiration society, but Stephanie's done a really nice job of orienting the college, especially in the strategic planning process that is now underway, of orienting the various constituencies in the college outside of the APT process, but also inclusive of the APT process, about a commitment to a sort of values sense of how it is we see ourselves and our identity as a college, and how we build that shared sense of commitment to values in virtually everything we do, you know, from our teaching, from the service that we provide, and of course the research and the promotion and tenure process. And I think that kind of stepping back maybe out of the day-to-day nitty-gritty and saying, okay, big picture stuff, how is it that we're going to bring about this values-based change at a college-wide level across a lot of different of our activities and the work that we do, I think has been really important. And we'll see if it bears fruit, but I think we're well underway. So I will say one more thing. Beyond the committee, I also think on the APT front that the dean's letters in the APT process, there's been a shift in the tone of those to more of a values focus. So you know how you write these letters and they will sometimes just jump right into the nitty-gritty or the metrics, right? If you premise the arguments on a values, you know, the College of Arts and Humanities values this when we're assessing our colleagues and when we're evaluating them for promotion and tenure. I'd like to think that we're managing up to the university level committees and to the provost level examination of these committees. This last cycle, I think we didn't have any questions, so I'm going to assume that maybe it's working a little bit, you know, so.
So maybe I can talk about a tool. It's in exactly the same space, the sort of merits and promotion, and trying to think about ways that we can make the kinds of work that have typically not been visible or visible but undervalued in the process, both more visible and then more appropriately valued. And about 3 years ago, UC Riverside introduced a mandatory system that every department had to participate in articulating their research norms. And then this department research statement would go forward with every merit or promotion file from a faculty member in that department. And a lot of departments took advantage of that opportunity to begin to articulate multiple pathways to advancement for the first time. From the traditional pathways, no one at UCR has suggested jettisoning those measures, but instead also adding pathways that encompass more inclusive modes of research practice and research dissemination. And now we're 3 years in and we can see how this has been working. And I can say pretty confidently that we've gone from almost always filing public-facing humanities work and a lot of digital humanities work as service, which remember at UCR hasn't traditionally accounted for that much in merits and promotion, to general acceptance, at least in practice, of understanding that work as advancing the research enterprise. So now it's a much more complicated question of how to assess that work when we're sort of innovating and thinking about ways of disseminating scholarship that don't have generations of metrics in place. How do we then do we assess them? But that's a major, I think, improvement of asking the question of how to assess this rather than wondering whether it should count at all. Now the assumption is that yes, it counts, but how much does it count and why does it count that much? And so there's still the work that needs to be done by the department, by the dean, of explaining how these more inclusive pathways to advancement function. The other major area, though, that I think is still lagging in our system is how to account for credit and reward the sorts of informal, especially undergraduate advising that we know falls disproportionately to faculty who are women, people of color, and or members of the LGBTQ community. So one of the things that we've tried to do is create another tool. And this is a now optional rather than required mentoring statement through which candidates for advancement can explain their approach to mentorship. And this has not been in place as long as the research statements, but I think it's making a pretty rapid advancement in making that kind of activity more legible in files. Those faculty who don't do that work don't typically include a mentorship statement. Those faculty who do a lot of it talk about it in ways that make it sort of available for the rest of us to consider and to assess. Now it puts an extra burden on, so they're already doing the burden of the extra work. Now they have an extra burden to say, here's how we're doing it. So it's not a perfect system, but I think it is making it much less invisible than it was. And I say invisible with that kind of emphasis because we know people are doing this work, and we typically know who are the people who are doing a lot of this work. But we don't always, and unless there's something in the file to point to, it makes it very hard to reward it through this system. And the mentoring statements, I think, are giving us something to point to in the file. I think that one is still to be seen whether or not it has a real effect on outcomes. I think that the multiple pathways in the research statement is definitely having an impact on outcomes. But I'm hopeful because these tools make it more possible to kind of have the conversation that needs to be had and make the arguments that Stephanie and Trevor just talked about making.
I think it's so exciting to see how this is starting to have impact over the course of several years. And Kiril, I love that suggestion. I'm writing it down because we were challenged with that as well. And one of the things that we did was to look at documents, right, and documentation, and try and get at that with working with a department on embedding the CPIL language into annual review guidelines to try it out as a pilot in one department, and then having another chair work on embedding it in their peer review letters that they sent out. So that would explain. I have an article that we put together that I put the link in the chat, and there's a video too that I'll put the link there in a minute. But we sent these materials out to explain the approach. And what's been really interesting is then to see peer reviewers actually use that language in their peer review letter coming back, right? So, I mean, not everybody has done that, but that's been, they've evaluated it, and some people have really liked the model, and that's been very satisfying. And I think it's helped us work really closely with chairs who are working with colleagues who have some of these alternate pathways, and thinking about how do we assess those, trying to make sure that chairs are asking the folks who have the ability to assess those in their letters. So looking at the full dossier and thinking about, well, who in the field knows how to look at this digital humanities project and could write to it, who's also, well seen. And that way you have 4 or 5 letters and different people are addressing different pieces, and that then provides the documentation, as well as hopefully year after year in the annual review as well. And that has helped us make a case then for the deans and provost level. Yeah, Kiril.
Sonja, I'm so happy to hear that you're sending them out to reviewers and to hear that that's been the reaction. This has been a actually topic that generated a lot more heated controversy than I would have expected at UCR about whether or not these research statements should go to external reviewers. And one of the very strongly articulated positions from another unit on campus was absolutely not. The whole point is that you don't tell them what you value. You're asking them what they value and how it marks it, how this file sets it. And besides that, everyone already knows what everybody values, and there's no point in the exercise. And that was a very frustrating, I think, to us, that was a very frustrating response. And so, but we've now made it so the departments have the choice about whether or not they send the statement out, but then they have to do it for every action in that department. But it's department by department. And that's also, it's not great. So I'm very happy to hear the success of that pilot.
We put it in the section that says these are the standards by which folks are measured in the college. That was where we embedded it. So we didn't luckily didn't have pushback on that. So okay, thank you. So the third question, finally, in the work that you have been doing at your various institutions, what are some of the challenges and obstacles that you have faced, as well as possible solutions or opportunities that have emerged there? What are your thoughts on that?
Kiril, you should go first this time.
Okay, I'll start this time.
Yeah.
So I see really two interlocking challenges, especially on the question of these two, well, especially the research statement, not so much the mentoring statement yet. One is, I think, a highly predictable traditionalist pushback, the sort of explicit complaint that we're lowering standards, and no department of this ever has accepted that for promotion. That's one, and that's kind of easier to deal with. The other is forwarding merit and promotion recommendations that don't reflect the more inclusive report. So here's a department that's created a more inclusive approach, and then when they vote, they don't apply it, and that's a little bit trickier. So that's one thing, is this kind of pushback. The other, though, I think, is a longer term challenge. And that is the institutionalization of these kinds of changes. So our current provost, who has final decision-making authority in all these projects, or on these cases, is supportive of this approach. And so even when there is that pushback in the files, it hasn't typically affected the outcome, because the provost has been supportive of the process. But what if she weren't? What if we had a different provost? How much of the success of this so far depends on the particular person who is making the final decision in these cases? And that's where I think the institutionalization of the expectations is something that I think is the next sort of step in this process of transformation.
We all watch who's gonna unmute first. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think again, culture doesn't change overnight. It takes time. And Kiril is right. I think we have a great provost at Maryland. I think she understands what we do. She gets the importance of thinking in new ways about the processes of our particular distinctive kind of work. But it's a good question. What if she moves on to the presidency somewhere and we get a provost who is an engineer or something, you know, who expects the humanities and the arts to be evaluated in the same ways, asking us for how many citations, you know, we could get back there. And so, you know, I think it is really continuing to educate them. That's why when we had our HuMetrics workshop here, we really made an effort to invite the Associate Provost of Faculty Affairs. He was in the room, he heard, he saw the cards, he was part of the activity. He has to take that message back to the Office of Faculty Affairs, and hopefully it just becomes more and more of a cultural change. We're lucky that Oregon is getting a provost who gets it already, and won't need to be convinced, right? Shout out to Chris Long. But he's going to be now sitting with other provosts. He's going to be telling them about this work. And then slowly this becomes wave after wave of new thinkers around this. Again, to reiterate, the biggest hurdle is those of us who didn't get to use these in this kind of value-driven approach in our climb, right? And so we expect that everybody must climb the same way that we did. It takes time to convince our generation to regard that as one era and this as a new era that we can support.
Stephanie and Bonnie will probably laugh at this, but I'm getting more and more impatient. You know, I like this time idea. I know it's going to take time and it's a slow process. And, you know, the biggest producer of change in higher education is retirement. You know, I mean, I think, you know, that's going to happen. But some experiences recently, and I mentioned this review committee on this award. I'm getting to the point of thinking we need to be more, aggressive is wrong, but assertive, I guess, and just laying it out there and, you know, pushing back on this, what one author calls the tyranny of metrics. You know, when people start flailing out with their citation numbers, maybe we need to say, whoa, stop. You know, what do those really tell us? And are there other ways of thinking about the impact of this research or this work? You know, and I don't know. I'm a bull in a china shop, but I tend to think that there's room here for a little bit more boldness sometimes. And I know we're all committed to that, and I think that's great, but I just needed to say that.
Now, Trevor, I think we've had the same challenge too at Michigan State, because within the college, I think we're understanding more and more, but across campus, right? When you're exactly what you're saying, the others aren't seeing us for the work that we're doing because they're not seeing the metrics. They're going with the grant dollars, and we just can't compete with the grant dollars because that money's just not out there for us. And that's a real challenge. So trying to figure out how do we represent this to our folks in STEM so that they see the qualitative metrics. You know, I was reading something, actually I was reading something the other day, and it made me smile, and I won't say what the theory is, but there was a sociologist saying most of the work on this theory has been done only on qualitative, and we think there's a reason to have quantitative. And I just chuckled, right? But that just doesn't happen very often. So, but that we need to think more about this. We're almost at 3 o'clock. So I think maybe, does anyone else have anything to say on the successes and challenges, or we could open it up for questions? that sound good? All right, I think let's open it up for questions and answers here. I'm not sure how we do that with the webinar format.
So folks can either type in the Q&A section at the bottom or raise your hand, and I will invite you to turn on your mic.
Okay, we'd love to have questions and good discussion.
It looks like we have one from Sahar. One moment.
Fantastic. Hello, Sahar.
I just unmuted myself. I really want to say this has been, between brackets, fantastic. I don't remember being so excited about a webinar for the last several decades. That is not really any exaggeration. I really mean it genuinely. And that's because of two reasons. Number one, at the very beginning of the webinar, Breaking the Mold program was mentioned, and that has been a life-changing moment in my academic career. And that's not an overstatement. Before joining Breaking the Mold, I was like, oh, administrative work, no. Leadership, no, that's not for me. I just enjoy my scholarship, and thank you so much. After joining this program, I really realized it's very important for every faculty member to think, you know, what kind of leader you are and how can you explore your leadership skills. So I want to really give a big shout out to our former dean, Bonnie Thornton-Dill, and also Dr. Psyche, Williams, and others who have really worked on this big and important undertaking and this important project. And I would love to see similar programs and similar initiatives being undertaken by colleges, by universities, because it's really vital, very important, and especially more so for faculty of color, for underrepresented minorities, for women of color. These are groups that we need to encourage and we need to inspire with these types of initiatives. So that's something I definitely want to put out there on the table. The other thing is I was delighted to see our current dean, Dr. Stephanie Shonekan, talking about her podcast and how much she loves her podcast and the feeling that, is that going to count towards my own academic journey? Our associate dean, Dr. Trevor Parry-Giles, talking about his work in the media. And that said, oh my God, I really resonate so much with that as someone who has my own media program, media appearances. And then I get this mixed feeling about it, right? On one hand, I very much enjoy it, just like my colleagues expressed in this webinar. On the other hand, there is always a pinch of guilt. Oh, you could have just spent this time writing your book and just getting your full professorship a couple of years ago. And in order for us to have some kind of change, and I think that was mentioned also in the webinar, we need to push forward. I think Trevor mentioned the word push, and I agree with him on the importance of pushing in terms of exerting more effort and also speeding up the process of taking into account the holistic, comprehensive portfolio of faculty members who are going up for tenure and promotion and who are going up for full professor. So I'm not really sure what the impediments or the obstacles may be that are maybe slowing down some of that work or not making it happen as fast as it should. But I would definitely love to hear from all the experts and colleagues on this call, what could be done in order to put all of these wonderful ideas into practice and to account for faculty members' holistic scholarship, contributions, community engagement when going up for tenure and promotion or going up for full professor. Thank you so much.
Well, one of the things that we've tried to do in this last year, and I think it's been pretty successful, is for years, our Office of Faculty Affairs for the entire university has done these APT workshops oriented towards assistant professors in one sense and for associates in the other. And, we've not, well, in my experience, we haven't done those at the college level. And doing that at the college level allows us to sort of, not subversively, but, subtly, I guess, work this kind of approach into the advice and mentorship that we're providing for our untenured and unpromoted faculty. Mm-hmm. And, I think that's a small step, but it is a step that gets us to a place where we're working this into the fabric of how it is we talk about all of these things and these processes, these institutional dynamics that affect how it is we do and evaluate the work that we do. So, that's one thing that we've tried to implement here in Maryland, I think to some success, and we'll see moving forward. So
I think part of the push is also is in a sense quotidian, but extremely important. And that is the need for people in our system, at least, to actually put the files forward that don't include the traditional benchmarks, but do have what we've identified as a body of work that meets one of the other pathways. And it takes some bravery to do that. But when they do go forward, and then when they're successful, then they've created a precedent. And universities are really powerful recreators of precedent. It's one thing we do really well. It's recreate precedent. So part of the push has to be to start creating those precedents in practice. And I think that's where some of my sort of most hopeful thoughts about this at UCR. And I should say that all of the research statements in the departments that are doing this are depending heavily on the resources in their professional associations that are already sort of leading the way. The MLA, AHA, they already have a lot of work out there encouraging departments to consider the public facing as part of the research enterprise. It's in really sort of simple terms. Now that we have people, and it's not just that, some people have put forward files on the basis of really influential editorial work. So it's not necessarily public facing, it's very much field facing, but it's not the traditional book. And as we get a sort of body of this precedent, then it allows us to push the envelope and encourage other people to follow the same pathway.
Can I just add too, I think that precedent point is really important, and it speaks to a problem that we've identified with making this kind of shift to a values-based orientation, particularly in APT. And it's what a lot of others have noticed this as well. It's this unwritten set of criteria. It's the stuff that isn't in the actual policy documents, but that everyone knows, or that all of the senior colleagues are telling the untenured folks, this is what you really need to do to get tenure and promotion. And those are really powerful, I think. And I think we've had to work very hard, and part of this workshopping process is to try to erode some of that and the power of that unspoken criteria on the ways in which we think about our colleagues' work.
And if I could just add one more thing, is that yes, I know we can get impatient with all of this, right? But and because we want to push, and we want to move quickly into this new what we think is a constructive and productive way of evaluating what we do. And we need to be careful. You know, I think whenever and we've seen this in different parts of political life. Whenever we want things to move very fast, and we push people without first socializing them and bringing them along, the walls go up. So I'm a little bit mindful of that. I'm mindful of our colleagues who will be evaluating these files and voting them up or down. And I want them to be on board too. I don't want them to do it because we have forced them to do it. I want them to do it because they also value this work. So the socializing part is good, but you know, it's great that we're currently doing our strategic plan in the college, and we had a discussion of this yesterday, and Trevor's words were bold and brave. So we want to be bold and brave, but yet we also want to be careful and bring everybody along.
If I could add one thing that we've tried at Michigan State too, is if you have a department that can pilot a change in their bylaws, and it's in the criteria in the bylaws that has been the most effective. And one department had the term, instead of book, it was impactful scholarship. And the thought that a co-authored book in that field is more work than a single authored went really far, right? So suddenly you had the idea that collaborative scholarship would count. Another department put in film or book, or I don't know what the third one was, but, and someone got, Sahar, your question was, what about going up to full? Well, that enabled a committee that might not have recognized that before, to say, well, now it's in our criteria, it's in our bylaws that we have to accept that as a major work in place of the film. And the film, you can talk about, where it's been screened, you can talk about where it's, what awards it's gotten, has it been picked up by a distributor, has it been reviewed? And those are alternate metrics that you can use. And that then has really shifted. What's been the hardest to get at are those RPT committees in the departments, actually. And then you can also, because I hear, well, our provost won't support it, our dean won't support it. But if it's in the bylaws, that's hard for a dean to go and override legally.
So there's a question in the chat from Kristen Haas. I'm working on a toolkit for the assessment of engaged humanities / non-traditional humanities / collaborative humanities at the Humanities Collaboratory at the University of Michigan. From where the panelists sit, what tools do we need? There are a lot of resources out there. What are the gaps?
Can you say what the toolkit is one more time?
Yes, it's a toolkit for assessment of engaged or collaborative humanities. And maybe, Kristen, do you want to give a little context about what that means? Is that sort of community engaged work, or how you're defining that?
Hello, can you hear me? I'm defining it quite broadly. And I share the impatience that was expressed earlier. I think I'm 25 years into this process. I co-founded Imagining America 25 years ago. So thank you. So I'm trying to create specific, I mean, really, I want to pull together many of the different toolkits. I want to create something that will be valuable for department chairs, for people who are coming up for promotion, for people in the dean's office and at the provosts. I want a broad kind of bringing all of these resources that exist together for two reasons, because I think it will be useful. Also, because I think seeing that there are patterns, that there are so many institutions, as you have all discussed, who are changing their policies and creating new kinds of documents will help move others forward. So I've been trying to really learn the map of what exists, and I'm just trying to figure out what the gaps are. So, and in terms of assessment that will be legible at the tenure and promotion stage. Does that make sense?
I'm just thinking of some gaps. What I've seen is particularly in some fields have a lot of digital humanities work, and they're used to reading that. And I know there's a certain person in the audience will say, who is that? Who is used to reading it? There are other fields where it's just completely undiscovered country. And I'm thinking of suggestions for areas where it's not done very often. How do you provide assessment of that? I know that there was a university that was providing external peer review for community engaged work. I think this was Minnesota at some point, I'm not sure if they still have that. And you could, I think, send the work to them and they could review it and write a peer review. I'm finding that committees are struggling with how to assess digital humanities work because there's so many different types, and there aren't external peer reviewers always in a particular field, or we don't know who they are to us to, write that assessment. So I would say that's a place, because it's there's so much going on. It's so broad, it's changing all of the time, and committees are struggling to do that, and chairs are too. So that's where I would point to.
Kristen, I think it's really important work that you're trying to do, and I don't really have a suggestion about how to do it other than to say I think it needs to be done, precisely for the reason that Sonja just pointed out. I think the challenges that I've seen fall into two main categories. One is peer review, and the other is impact. And I think that shifting the impact from a conversation of what journal did it get published in to what community did it serve has been helpful. But the only ways that I've seen so far to really measure that are things like, are their narratives. And those narratives are centered on claims, which a very skeptical assessor might say doesn't have the data of a citation count or whatever analog to back it up. And so how do you counter that that hypothetical complaint? One of them also is measures of impact is like if it's been reviewed in the press or mentioned in the press. So I recently reviewed an extremely well documented file that had the candidate had themselves done, here's how this set of things had been mounted, and this is the equivalent of the peer review, and here are all of the reception data, the visitors to the exhibition, the press releases about it, and that's impact. So they had done, for that particular kind, they had done the work and put it in the file, and it made a really powerful file. But what do we do in cases where it doesn't fit exactly that metric? Digital is another one that I think is really difficult to compare. Although I will say, take a popular podcast and compare its hits to a citation count and tell me which one has bigger impact.
Yeah, I'd also add downloads. Download statistics on academic articles, but also other sorts of things can be a great measure of how this is maybe making its way out of the academic audiences into classrooms, into a whole variety of places. And the other point I was going to make real quickly, bouncing off of what Kiril was saying, was our artists, our musicians, and our other creative scholars really have this down pat. I mean, they have a good way of documenting without the usual sorts of academic-y matrices of demonstrating their impact and the prestige of what it is they do and where they show their work and who's reviewing their work and all of that. And that may be an infrastructure to tap into and think about in terms of how we might do that with non-traditional humanities projects or products.
And just to quickly add, I think tools like academic analytics can also evolve and have been open to hearing new ideas. So for example, now in academic analytics, they include articles that we write in some of the journals that they hadn't previously recognized, and that's because they got a lot of feedback over the years. So so I think we can also influence some of the traditional ways that we've been evaluating. And I just want to say that I'm a fan of Imagining America, so I just wanted to say that.
Looks like Jason has a question.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for this discussion. I appreciate focusing on process over product. It's useful in a number of ways, but not least of which that it can, give us a chance to carefully look at the many steps that go into creating scholarship and reveal something that we kind of already know, but often don't really practice, at least vocally, which is that scholarship is a necessarily collaborative endeavor, despite the sort of pervasive myth that we have of solitary scholarship. So I'm wondering if you might take a moment to talk about, in addition to changes to tenure track promotion and tenure processes, which I know, often really is, sort of like this center that can really guide a lot of the things that we do in institutions, even though the balance of tenure to non-tenure track or staff can vary institution to institution. So in addition to those changes to tenure track promotion and tenure, I'm wondering how you have used values enacted approaches to make it possible to recognize and surface and amplify the work of staff and non-tenure track faculty, community collaborators, people who are, in the circuit, in the broader ecosystem, shall we say, of humanities scholarship across institutions.
Yeah, that's a great question. One example of what we've done here at Maryland is that and Bonnie and I are both on the same page with this, which we're typically on the same page anyway, but we recognized that we had a staff member who was such a valuable member of the team. I mean, just her understanding of the mission of the college, our undergraduate mission. She had served for years as an assistant dean. And the question of putting her up for associate dean, which typically had been only faculty who were, I think, at the top, in terms of the rank, they were always full professors. And so when we brought the idea forward, there was a lot of pushback. Again, that was recognizing the deep impact of the work of this staff member. And we worked really hard to make a case for it, had to go across campus, go to the admin building, build a case, talk to all the chairs, talk to the dean of undergraduate studies for the university. Everybody said, this is not how we do things. This is not how we do things. And we just had to keep going because we recognized that this was a staff member who we needed to put into action what we said we valued about her. And we did it. So we're really proud. I'm really proud of that work. And so she's now the first staff member who has been promoted to the level of associate dean in the College of Arts and Humanities. That's one example.
So I'm working with advisors right now in our college, and we're getting a lot of pushback from central administration because they like to count the number of students that the advisors have met with as the measure of their productivity. And seeing that I don't want our advisors treated like they work in a call center, I want to push back with that and to talk about, well, what are the values that our advisors hold in the quality of their advising, and talk about what, tell some stories about that quality of advising with equity and the need for advising to bring about equity. And that already, this wonderful, my wonderful assistant dean who I work with is central in this effort. So I think that's been really important. And just more broadly, we've used the CPIL approach to really bring in non-tenure system faculty and academic staff in the college and help them see themselves and be seen. Really, it's caused just a general shift in the college and bringing in staff to all doing work that is integral to the academic mission. We always have work to do there. We're trying to articulate the different areas more. People ask us, what do you mean by this? They're like, we don't always know. You have to talk it through, work with us, help us figure that out. But I think that in general, it's been very rewarding, and we have people who are being promoted regularly now with non-tenure system faculty, and our attrition rate is down. And we even have some people retiring as non-tenure system faculty, and that's just not happened before. And I see that as an impact measure and a positive one.
Just a quick word about the power of collective bargaining for our non-tenure system faculty. That one of the sort of concerns that I had when I first came into the role of the associate dean was that that the contributions that those faculty were making were so not noticed that there was no opportunity for them to get opportunities for improvement. So, tenure track faculty get regular feedback. How are you doing? Well, you have a file come forward. Your colleagues evaluate it. They comment on it. You get this sort of feedback. There was a mechanism to do that for non-tenure track faculty, but it was almost never used, except in a few departments that had already had the cultural shift to think of them as sort of fully integrated members of the department. But those were the outliers. As the result of the most recent collective bargaining agreement, we now have a sort of graduated process of review over multiple years, each of which has an elevating bar for successful advancement, but then longer term contracts if you do advance. So it creates some much more stability than was there in the past. But it also requires mandatory engagement with the work that they do and feedback to that work. So if they're doing well, they're told they're doing well. If they're doing well, but not maybe well enough for the next step, they're told how, what needs to improve. And that gives them opportunities to sort of concentrate on. I think that's possible in a system in which they're, I think, comparatively better compensated than they are in many places. I'm not saying they're well enough compensated, but but this sort of thinking about their professional development and, again, institutionalizing it. But that was done through collective bargaining rather than through, work from us.
So any other questions? I want to be mindful of the time. I know that the HuMetrics folks wanted to say some closing remarks. All right, shall I turn it over to you?
Sure. Thanks so much. So thank you, first of all, to everybody in the audience for joining us. I hope you can join me also in thanking our panelists for sharing their work. I don't know if you can clap on this Zoom, but thank you for sharing your work, your leadership and vision, and your hopes for a transformational future in higher education. I want to return momentarily to the values that Chris activated in the beginning. I know we've been inspired today in our past work with Michigan State and Maryland, University of California, Riverside, and the ways that you've built community, where you've modeled generosity and you've enriched our collective ethical imagination. And we're also really inspired by all of you in the audience, which, looking through the list is just full of so many people who are taking engaged and thoughtful and purposeful action to improve the conditions of higher ed and the lives of your colleagues and your students and your collaborators. Trevor, really helpfully reminded us about two values, both joy and boldness. And Stephanie, thank you for reminding us about the importance of process over product. So, kind of combining those, in the midst of all these challenges that we face for higher education, it's really reaffirming to hold space with all of you for hope and for leadership and even joyful ambition for the positive good that higher education can offer, and to share an appreciation for the shared process in building incremental change towards that goal. So we appreciate everybody's work on the panel. We also in the audience see your work, and we're grateful to be part of your community. Tomorrow, we hope you'll be able to join us to continue the conversation with two panels. The first starts at 2 p.m. Eastern and the second at 3:30. You'll hear from a number of leaders with roles within and alongside of the Academy. and learn more about programs like Breaking the Mold, which you heard a little bit about earlier. And you can see the speakers on the HuMetrics website page that I'll link briefly in the chat so you know who will be there and what times to remind yourself. And so please join us again, contribute to this ongoing and necessary discussion. And we hope that we'll continue to learn from one another, but also beyond learning, build plans for the future with both joy and boldness. So thanks very much, and we hope to see you tomorrow.